So logo design, some really good questions here. Let me go over some of my approach to logos and to identity, brand, and specifically we talk about trademarks and logos, and I hope this helps. So first off, great question about what programs to use. Personally, Illustrator has always been my tool of choice, and it's pretty standard in graphic design, communication design fields, branding fields. So Illustrator is great because you're creating vector graphics that can scale up and scale down. It's excellent at exporting different versions and managing that process. Typically, you want any kind of brand, any kind of logo or trademark that you create to be vector. So that way it will hold up when scaled. It'll hold up on a polo shirt, on a billboard, on a letterhead. In motion design, it works really well with After Effects. So Vector is going to be your way to go, and Illustrator is a great tool for it. I know more people are using Canva lately, and Canva is an option, but for true creation, Illustrator is going to be the industry standard tool. A question about AI and AI tools. So there are some tools I've played around with out there that some generative AI tools that create logos. I've not been terribly impressed, though my standards are pretty high, I guess. So I found a lot of these tools will take words, will take a word and then just style the word. So you take a word and then you put a circle around it. Or you take a word and you zhuzh it up with some kind of texture or something like that. Sometimes they will use gradient, and gradient is a real challenge when we talk about any kind of brand or any kind of logo and how it's going to hold up in one color, in flat color, when printed black and white, right, or when used in a high contrast environment. So there's some tools out there that I played with. I don't have any to recommend right now, because typically anything I've tried to make with them, it's like put a circle around it, put a triangle behind a word. Maybe sometimes with a good prompt, it'll stick like a trophy in it, or some kind of tire from a car or something, or bows and ribbons or quilt work, whatever. But they tend to feel kind of stuck on, like clip art. So right now the tools feel very much like, here's some clip art and stick it in a shape and then it's done, instead of a unique logo type that communicates some kind of concept that that's unique to the brand and that evokes the brand in a unique way. So the AI tools right now are kind of stick it on logos that feel like just about everybody else. True, getting into the design is going to be a much more successful logo type because it will differentiate that brand or that organization. It'll differentiate nonprofit or whatever out there against everybody else. Any tips and advice for non-design students? So a few tips I would give. One of the easier ways to get into logos and creating those is to start with a good typeface. DaFont, D-A-F-O-N-T, has long been a source of typefaces that aren't really great. They're not very good, not very well designed, but it could be a start for logo types. But good sources like myfonts.com or the Adobe font library, those are going to be quality typefaces that you could bring into Illustrator, then convert a typeface to outlines. So convert to outlines and start to move those letter forms around and zhuzh them up, mess them up, overlap them, cut parts away. That is one way to get started with a logo type is to start with type. And start with interesting typefaces and then move those letter forms around and start to break them apart and overlap and create some dimension. So type's not a bad way to start. And I think it's an accessible way to start for early career designers instead of starting with pure images. The second step I would recommend would be starting with shapes. If you start with shapes and simple shapes and start to play with those shapes that mimic the content of an organization, whatever their product is or their location is, then that could be a really successful way to explore some of those, to create a logo type that would be interesting. And then last I would say would be color. Color is highly valuable in creating and differentiating a logo type and differentiating a brand. I recommend staying just to a few colors, maybe one or two. Be careful going into gradient because those are going to be difficult to reproduce in the most challenging environments, especially for screens, right? So if I have a logo and I need it to be on a television screen or need it to be on some kind of display where people are watching a sporting event or whatever, if we're using After Effects, that logo's got to stand up on a background of moving, sports players or on figure skaters, just to use sport examples where a lot of motion design is used. So keeping color simple, keeping a logo type where it doesn't depend on color will give that visual brand, that element, more flexibility when it has to be used in lots of different environments. So I'm not going to say that I'm the best logo type designer ever. I've done a lot of work in this space and I've got some examples. Let me show you around a few I've got on my website so I can just talk from some examples. Again, these aren't like super amazing, but at least I can speak to like some of my process. So this one, the Oxford Disc Golf logo, I'm an avid disc golfer and this mark plays on shapes. So disc golf, we throw discs, they are circular, they fly through the sky. And so this kind of retro, these lines, they're retro because of their rounded shape and the rounded edges here at the end, kind of that 70s feel and a typeface that's got kind of that funky roundedness that's playful. But because they swoosh, it feels like this disc is flying through the air. And Oxford works so well because the O in Oxford can be also a disc. And then the X is playful because X's are punchy and being able to put those strokes inside the letter forms. A good example here of taking shapes, converting them into a unique arrangement, the OX, and then playing into the meaning. And the meaning of disc golf is throwing a circular disc through the sky and creating, playing the game and that it's flying. Another example, Design Workbench is a kind of a lab group initiative that I've been using for a long time as a vehicle for design research and other projects. This variation of the mark, I've put an outline around it because it usually has a white outline or these white speech bubbles. So it is a bit problematic when it holds up, but I actually have variations that work on in one color. So it can be translated in different variations. But you'll see here, it is two speech bubbles implied layering over one another. And where those speech bubbles meet, there's a star. So that communicates people or individuals or organizations speaking, and where they speak and overlap, something cool happens. So this is a pure visual mark, but they're recognizable elements. And that can be really successful in any kind of logo where you have two elements that are speech bubbles. We're pretty used to those. We see those in our text messages all the time. And then this star, which is a 9-pointed star, quite unique. You don't really see a 9-pointed star very often. So a unique type of star with speech bubbles. And yes, I have gradient. I also have flat versions of this. So I don't have to reproduce the gradient everywhere. That'd be very expensive on a t-shirt, right? I need to have flat color for a mark to hold up like this. But that's a good example of using shapes that are recognizable, that can hold up on their own. We can put words with it in other contexts too. I've thrown a Texas Independence Day party for a very long time. We've actually transitioned that to an Ohio statehood party just this year in 2024. But this mark, you'll notice, uses those visual elements again. Here's an example of stars are very important in Texas. The Texas flag uses a lone star or a singular star. That's a recognizable visual element. Also, this outline of the Alamo, people in Texas would recognize the Alamo, and all I needed was this window kind of element set in the Alamo to really reinforce its outward shape. So its shape here, the silhouette is clearly Alamo. This element of the window reinforces it. It also breaks up some of this negative space, and then text is in bold type. And I've taken that type. Notice here is a good technique. Take type and squish it in. That's not the technical term. Use tracking to track all the letter forms in and overlap them. That's one way to take typography, modify it, and make it special by squeezing it in and overlapping those elements. That takes typography and allows it to feel special and styled. So that's one approach you can use with typography for logo types, is take your type, track it in or track it way out. Play with different variations to make that an interesting composition. So that's that Texas logo type there. One that I did a long time ago, find your spot for a short initiative. This is an example of an all type solution. Find your spot was the initiative, right? The red circle, pretty clear. It's a big old circle. It's a spot itself, but then like dropping the center of this O, making it actually the O be a spot itself, and varying the type. So here's an example. Oh man, I would have fixed that. That kind of kerning's not that great. Yeah, I'm seeing my own mistakes from the past. I should have fixed that. Notice how that space in between that Y and that O is larger than the O and the U. Like the space between all these elements is the same, but that's a big old gap. Yeah. Well, that's past Dennis. I see it now. So just an example of paying attention to details, really huge in those spaces between letters when you use type as a mark, as the driving component of the mark. So in this one though, varying, like letting that D drop down and nest within that Y, letting the type play, breaking up the words and the letter forms into different planes can create some really interesting compositions. So play with the size of those words. If you're doing a word heavy mark, play with the arrangement, you know, and how they're arranged there. I'll talk about just a couple more to give you examples, and then we'll move on. An example of this one, Schoolworks. I changed the O's into gears, so very, very subtle to add some interest there. This mark, Lake Cities Green, an advocacy organization. So in the Lake Cities, there is a bridge that is a significant component of these cities that have lakes all around them, or one large lake. So here's where there is a bridge, but it's an invisible bridge. So the negative space of the bridge and these subtle water waves, and then the tree line that's above it, the color communicates green and blue, trees and water. Waves that communicate water, bridge that's implied that communicates the bridge, a typeface that is classic and kind of timeless. It's got a little bit of a retro feel to it to create some of that interest. So that's a few marks and a few tips I might give. Play with type, squish it, move it. So I don't recommend squishing type, actually smashing it unless you're really going extreme, but track it in, track it out, overlap it, use it at different planes. Be playful and change the letter form sizes. Those are ways to make type do some really interesting things. Color can communicate so effectively. Keep it to just a few colors, and shapes. Using shapes in ways that evoke the content of what you're trying to communicate, and make for interesting, playful organizations. And then don't forget, these marks have to hold up, and they have to work in lots of different contexts. They got to work on a website. They got to work on screens where people are watching, getting information, perhaps at an airport. They've got to work on a t-shirt. They've got to work in lots of different areas, and keeping marks as simple and straightforward as possible will set you up for success in avoiding those troubling times when you're like, oh man, this mark does not work at all. All right, thanks for asking. I hope that helps, and I'll walk through some of those marks. And this is such fun work. Creating identities is like this poetry of just a few elements to communicate something fascinating. So I hope you have fun doing it.